Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the COBOL guy, and in this video we're going to talk about making decisions in COBOL. Most of you probably already have programming languages under your belt, and they call them if statements. And in COBOL they're a lot more wordier. You can get away with doing some if statements, or actually I should say most of the if statements using C or C++ like conditional operators, but in COBOL there's also a more verbose way of doing it, so we're going to do it both ways. And the reason I'm going to do it the more verbose way as well is so you can have exposure into that. What does it actually look like? But you're not required to do that, but old code might have it, probably does have it, because in earlier versions of COBOL, you didn't have this option. So let's just jump right into the COBOL code. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new project, and I'm on Mint Linux. You can do this on any operating system, and we're going to be using GNU COBOL for this. So let's go ahead and create a new project, and I'm going to call this one Making Decisions. Making decision, that's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and edit this guy. All right. Now what I like to do is I like to build the project right away, so I'm just going to go ahead and make it. I'm going to go to Terminal, change to that directory, and just type main, and there you go. So we have our we have a COBOL program here all ready to go. And you might want to go ahead and change the dates because the date written and date complete is different. But I'm going to call this one in the program ID Making Decisions. And that program name has nothing to do with the directory where it's located, but it is pretty important that if you name your program this, you want to make sure that your end program has the exact same name. I'm going to go ahead and make it, run it, and everything looks good. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create a couple of variables. Now the reason I'm going to create a couple of variables is I want to be able to use them for comparison purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in the working storage section. And we already do have some variables there, but let's go ahead and create our own. I'm going to say, I'm just going to call them var1 and var2. And I'm just going to make them all binary, comp1, and let's do var2. Okay, let's make sure that I did that correctly. Yep, looks good. It compiled okay. All right. Now in my COBOL template, you don't have line numbers. Actually, in just about any editor other than mainframe or SPF, you're not going to get those automatic numberings. So in my COBOL template, I actually have in the make file, I actually have a renumber, and then if I go up here into file and reload, it actually renumbered it for me. So if you've seen other of my COBOL videos, you probably have already seen that. Okay, so we're going to delete some of the old stuff there, and let's go ahead and put in a display. I should probably add that to the template just so we can have it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start doing our if statements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say move 100 to var1, and then I'm going to say move 200 to var2. And that's just to put some data in there. So let's go ahead and make it, make sure everything's still cool. Okay, great. So now let's do our very first if statement. And we're going to do a very simple if statement. And I'm just going to say if var1 is equal to var2. Then, so that is the format of the more verbose way of doing an if statement in COBOL. I could have done it to say is equal sign, single equal sign, or I could have actually gotten rid of the is completely. Now this all depends upon the compiler, is that you can use the equal sign. Now notice it's not a double equals. That's in C and C++, but that is not the way it's done in COBOL, but a single equal sign is done that way. Now I don't believe this is going to make because we don't actually have an end if yet, so we're not quite done. So let's go ahead and go back to the verbose, just because I like to show the verbose, because it's something you might see in older code if you get a job doing this. Okay, so I'm going to say display And this is going to be our first display, so it kind of helps you, our first if statement. So by putting that number sign there, or the pound sign with the number, it kind of helps you know which if statement is being executed here. var1 is equal to var2. And just like just about any other language, we can have an else. So if the condition is true, if var1 is equal to var2, then it's going to display that in the true portion of the if. Else, if it's not equal to, I'm going to say display var1 is not equal to var2. And then in COBOL, it's a little bit irritating that this is the case, but there really are no open and closed braces like there are in C, C++, and Java, and also indents don't mean anything in COBOL, so you actually have to put an end if statement. So end-if. Now those can be in all capital. You might see that because a lot of mainframes use just all capitals, and it ran just, or it compiled just fine. Let's go ahead and run it, and it says number one, var1 is not equal to var2. Now, why is that the case? Because var1 has 100 in it and var2 has 200 in it. All right, great. Now, I like things to be correct here, so I'm going to go ahead and put that there. Okay, so that's number one. And let's go ahead and comment that. Okay, so that's our number one if statement test. Now, you've got a number of different conditional statements here. We did the equals to. I'm now going to ask if var1 is not equal to var2. Then display, and let's make this a 2. var1 is not equal to var2. Else display var1 is equal to var2. And so let's put that end if there. Okay, I have to get the tab settings set up on my editor. And let's go ahead and put a comment there. That's my number 2 if statement. So if you put a not in front of the equals, that means it's going to basically say the opposite of equal. So if you notice, the true portion of the if statement in my first if statement is actually the false statement in my second if statement, which is the else, and vice versa. And the false part of my first if statement is actually the true part. So that's what I call negative logic. Some people love it. I absolutely love negative logic, but a lot of people don't. So I don't think I'm actually on the right column here. So let's go ahead and make sure. There we go. So that asterisk has to be on column 7. And there we go. We can go ahead and run it now, and you can see var1 is not equal to var2. So, and we didn't change var1 or var2. And also, that's something else you should be aware of, is that the if statements don't do anything to the variables. That might say, well, duh, of course they don't. Well, I've actually had students say, well, what is the value of these variables after the if statements? The if statements do not modify the variables. Now, if you do want to modify the variables, you can do it within the true or the false portion. I can say move 300 to var1. So I can do something like that. And you have to make sure the syntax is correct. And there's no open and closed braces. When it sees this word then, it says, okay, every statement below that is going to be part of the then until you get to an else or until you get to an end if. And that's another thing. You don't have to have the else if you don't want it, if you just want to say if. Now, there's a problem with that. If you don't include the else, it's arguable, or it can be argued that that if statement is not complete. Even if it's an empty else, it's a good idea to always complete your if statement so you can show in your code. It's a structured coding method that we used to use in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, more in the 80s and 90s. That you can mathematically prove that your logic is at least complete, if not correct, at least complete, by having an else on every one of your if statements. So always have a false condition. And I'm going to go ahead and build this after I added that, and you'll see, well, oh, I have a period there. That's something important too to remember. Because I had a period, I was basically telling the compiler that if statement is complete. So you want to get rid of the period. So the period only shows up on the end if. If you don't have let's go ahead and comment these out here. So I'm going to put I'm going to make this into a comment, and let's do the same here, and let's do the same with the else. Let's save it now. Okay, it made it, but I believe this because there is no end if, the display and the stop run are part of the if. So if I go in here and run it, you might not get these, you know, what you're looking for. So you might want to put a period there at the end of your true portion of the if, and let's go ahead and make that. And you know, the conditions or the operation is the same just because we have the way the program is set up. But you don't have to have an else, but you really do need to end your if with that period, or even better, you want to end it with the end if. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those comments. So that's really good format for a COBOL program. And again, it also depends upon your compiler. The IBM mainframe COBOL compiler may be a little bit different than the GNU compiler, which may be different than the Micro Focus COBOL compiler. So you want to make sure that you take a look at the programmer's guide for each one of your different compilers. Okay, so that's the if and that's the else, and we talked a little bit about the end if and where the period goes. So you don't put a period until the last statement of your if statement. Okay, so now let's talk about another one, and this one will be number 3, and we're going to talk about the else if. Now you may say, okay, is this the same as in C and C++? And Java, it is exactly the same. The else if is exactly the same. So I'm going to say if var1 is equal to 200, then display var1 is equal to 200. Else if, there's no dash between the else and the if. They're not the same word. They're separate words. Else if var1 is equal to 100, then display number 3, var1 is equal to 100. And then you should always close off your last else if with an else. Else display, oh, we got a little problem there. Something strange has happened. And let's put a close quote there. And let's put our end if. So the way that the else if works, if you're not familiar with it at all, the way that it works is that if this if is not true, if you don't get this true, then it asks another question. It's almost like a nested if, not quite, but it's almost like a nested if. Else if var1 is equal to 100. So if it's not equal to 200, then we want to check, is it equal to 100? If it's not equal to 200 or 100, then we might have a problem. So, but we do have a final else there. So let's go ahead and make this. All right, let's run it. And you can see, and mainly this is because I moved 300 to var1. So it's not equal to either one of those. So let's go ahead and put a comment in there. When I moved 300 into there, let's run it, and we actually got a different result. So because we moved 300 into var1, our if statement here was not what we anticipated. But this is a very good example of why you should close off all of your ifs with elses, because if it's not true, then what? Then what should it be? So you should always have some type of a close for your ifs like that. Okay, so that's else if. Now I can do as many of these as I want. I can do this. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. So I can have as many of these as I want. I can see 101, 102, 103, as much as I want. Also, the else if doesn't have to be just for the same variable. If you notice that we're checking all var1 here, the else ifs can also be, you can be checking var2, you can be checking var3, you can be checking var4. It doesn't matter. You can have any condition in there you want for any variable, any literal, anything you want. So let's go ahead and let's put in some actual code here. Let's go ahead and move 102, just to see if our if statement works with the else if. Notice it built just fine. We don't have a period anywhere here. It's only on the end if. And it makes it really nice to do it that way. Let's go ahead and run it. And yep, it's equal to 102. Now, why is it equal to 102? Because we moved 102 into it when var1 was not equal to var2. And then that allowed this if statement to process differently. So else ifs are really great for that. Okay, let's do another one. I like to call this one combined ifs. Now, I don't think I got that on the right column. I really have to fix this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, okay. Okay, so a combined if means that I want to ask two questions on the same if or on the same else if. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say if var1 is equal to 100 and, this is the combination, and var2 is equal to 200, then do something. Now I'm going to comment this out again up here because my example, I don't want it to do something different than I was expecting for this particular video. So if var1 is equal to 100 and var2 is equal to 200, the and means both sides must be true to get to this point. Display var1 is 100 and var2 is 200. So to get to that display, the one we just typed right there, both var1 must be equal to 100 and var2 must be equal to 200. So that's a combined. Now, I also get people saying, well, how many of these can we have? I can have as many as I want. And var2 is equal to, or is not, to 0. So now all three of those have to be true. Now, the third one there is ridiculous because if var2 is equal to 200, it's obviously not equal to 0. So when you're doing these if statements, these combined if statements, you might want to make absolutely sure that they're making sense. And the way that I do that is I do that with decision tables. I write things down on a piece of paper. I figure out, does this make sense? Flowcharts can really help quite a bit. So that's a really good way of doing it. Okay. Now, can we do this in an else if? Else if I can say var1 is equal to 100. This is the second one, or var2 is equal to 200, then, let's say 201. Then I'm going to say display var1 is, or var2. So the or means either one of them can be equal for the true condition to be executed, or the true statements to be executed. Both of them doesn't have to be. Remember, this is kind of subtle, but it's not really. The and means both sides, both conditions must be true for this particular display to be executed. The or means either one of these can be true for this display. Now I can go up here and change this to, what was it, 201? So let's go ahead and make, actually let's not do that there. Let's go right over here and let's move, just so you can see how this works, move 201 to var2. And we can see how this works. Now let's finish this up. Else display, and let's say number 3 here, or number 4. And it's a good idea. I'm going to put this number 4 colon on each one of these displays just so I can keep track of where I am when I'm executing my code. Okay, and then let's put an end if. Make sure there's no periods. It looks good. Let's go ahead and build this. Let's run it. Okay, so we're on number 4. It's easy to see the output because we put the number, the #4 there. var1 is 100 or var2 is 201. Let's take a look at this. So if var1 is equal to 100, which it is, and var2 is equal to 200, which it is not, because we put 201 into var2. So this is skipped. We're not going to be doing that one. Else, if var1 is equal to 100, or var2 is equal to 201, which it is. Both of them are true, which means that this display will be this true portion of the if. Now remember, an or means either one. So let's go ahead and put an extra 0 here on the var1 because we know var1 is not equal to 1000. Let's go ahead and make it and let's run it again. And we get the exact same result. And the reason is because var1 is not equal to 1000, but var2 is equal to 201. So that's why the true portion, the true statement of that else if actually occurs. Now, if we go ahead and change this to some other value, like let's change it to 500, 5600 is fine. And this is var2 we're changing. Then we're going to get this something strange happened. Because var1 is equal to 100, but var2 is not equal to 200, this line is skipped. Else, if var1 is equal to 1000, which it's not, or var2 is equal to 201, which it's not because we put 5600 into it, this is skipped. So the final else will be executed. It'll display something strange has happened. So this is really a good way to get to know condition statements, if statements, to figure out how they actually work in any language you're working in, is trying these things and putting those type of displays. Okay, so let's now take a look at the available conditions that you have in COBOL for these if statements. Okay, so I put together this little presentation on all of the different conditions because we could do the coding, but it'll take forever. So let's get through this pretty quick. So we already talked about the equal to. So you can say equal to, you can say equals, you can just use the equal sign. And there might be others, again, depending upon your compiler. A greater than, you can say greater than, or you can use the greater than sign. Again, it depends upon your compiler. So that's greater than. So that means the left is greater than the right. You can also ask if it's greater than or equal to. You might even have the ability to say greater than or equals. That means that the left is greater than or equal to the right, and you can use the greater than sign with an equals right after it as well on newer COBOL compilers. Less than, less space than, or the less than sign. So that means that the left is less than the right in the condition. You can also say less than or equal to, or less than equal signs, and that means the left is less than or it's equal to the right. Negative logic. You can put the word not in front of any of these conditions. So if you want to say not equal to, you can say not equal to, or you can say not and then the equal sign. So negative logic, I love it. It can actually reduce the amount of complexity in your if statement, but your brain has to kind of be wired in the negative logic way to make it easy to understand. Then combined logic, we already talked about that. We have and or. And means that both the left and the right side of the comparison must be true for the entire if statement to be true. If you have multiple ands, if you have more than just one and, that means that every one of the conditions must be true for the true portion of the if statement to be executed. The or means any condition in your combined logic if statement, any condition can be true for the true portion to be executed in your if statement. And we have some examples here of x is equal to 0 and y is less than 0. You can see another way of doing that. Instead of using is equal to, you can say x equals sign 0 and y equals sign 0. So you must have a complete condition. You can't say if x equals 0 and not equal 1. You've got to have if x equals 0 and x not equal to 1. So you must have that in there. And then you've got the or statement examples there as well. All right, so that is an introduction to if statements in COBOL. It's really not difficult, especially if you have another language under your belt, if you've already know C or C++ or Java or even Python for that matter. If the syntax is just a little bit more verbose, it's a little bit more, it's not complicated, it's just more wordy, but using the symbolic characters like less than or equal to, you don't have to type all those words in there. However, some older COBOL code will be in there. So we talked about less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, not. We also talked about how you could have multiple statements under the true portion of an if. You can do the same with the false portion of the if or the else. We also talked about the else if. Now, one thing we didn't talk about were nested if statements. And what a nested if statement is it's an if statement that if it's true, you can ask another if statement. If that's true, you can ask another. So you can have multiple if statements. Just be sure that if you do nested ifs, you always end them with an end if to close out that if. It's always also a good idea to have an else. Even if you're not interested in the else condition, it's always a good idea to have that in there just so you can show that you thought about that condition in your code, and even though you might not do something with it, you still thought about it. So you can actually say that your if statement is a complete if statement. People will argue with me about that. That's fine. It's really just style, programming style, but it's a programming style that I was forced to do in a couple of my jobs because they wanted to have structured COBOL code, and structured COBOL code meant completed if statements. Okay, so hope you enjoyed this video. Try it out. Try all kinds of different combinations. Practice makes perfect, and I hope to see you in our next video.